literacy, something that many of us take for granted. And when you don't have the ability to read, is the church the best place to do it? Or do you open yourself up to manipulation? Tracy is here to take us away on this next segment.
Thank you, Jimmy. Churches and religious organizations have done many philanthropic things throughout their existence. However, all you got to do is look at it closely, look at what they're doing closely, and you'll find a lot of exploitation. Many people who have been or currently are unhoused or without food, easy access to food, I should say, will tell you that while the church, many churches, many different churches and many different beliefs will offer a pew or a cot for you to sleep on, or a meal, which you can fill your stomach, they often hold it behind these needed resources behind a barrier of their faith, whether you need to, listen to a sermon or be baptized or align with their idea of morality. Unhoused LGBT children and their families get denied these resources based entirely off of just them being gay. They don't have to even be practicing, if that makes any sense. They just identify this way and are just automatically, you can't have food or sleep here. The church is doing this with a different angle with regard to literacy, which is going to be holding their aid in gaining increased literacy behind a curtain of manipulation and exploitation of these people who don't have it.
Yeah, and this article is from The Banner by Karen Swallow Pryor on December 20th, 2024. This article, I thought, was full of Christian bias, and I think it lacks any objectivity whatsoever. Helen, what are your thoughts on how the church, how this author perceives churches or religion in helping people to read or using reading as a tool to kind of better their lives? Are they patting themselves on the back a little too much, or is there something else at stake here?
Oh, they're definitely patting themselves on the back. like they are, because when I was reading it, I have mixed feelings, like I usually do. But it was basically like, oh, look what the great thing that the church is doing. And they're teaching kids, helping college students, read texts and, actually be able to read and analyze, but doing the Bible, which I kind of agree with. You should be able to read the Bible and analyze it through a critical lens. That would be even better. And I'm all for literacy. I am, more education. Yes. Cool. But this is a failure of the education system. This is a failure of churches not knowing their lane. And that's the problem, because my kind of feeling is that why are we having college age adults, because they're adults, going to churches to learn how to sit and read for long periods of time? And I get it. We live in a very fast-paced culture. Brains are changing because everything is quick information. You can read an article, get little sound bites, think that you're learning something, by reading a 2-page article, and you suddenly know how physics work. And it's no, that's not how this works. I understand how Shakespeare is written. No, you don't. You can't listen to, watch a TV show and hear someone talk about, A Midsummer's Night's Dream. And you suddenly know about that play. No, this is not how this works. But the issue is that that's the realm of education. When we were all growing up, and if you got a good education, you learned how to read a text. You learned how to take information out of it. You learned plots and themes and what the author's intent was. And, if you got into, higher education, you learned how to read art, how to vet sources and so on and so forth. The church isn't going to do that, because if they had to vet sources for the Bible, guess what? Where does all the faith go?
So I think
start questioning. Just saying.
That is a good point, because there are techniques and tools that are a part of reading. It's not just being able to put words together, right? It's being able to kind of verify and interpret texts and languages and times and things like that. And so you're right. The church, the reason why I think you're saying that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're not going to do that, is because they don't have a history of doing that. The church has a history of taking advantage of people who can't read by forcing a message on them, by telling them what the text and doing the interpretation for them, telling them what the text is saying. And so I am hesitant, to say the least, to buy into this. Stephen, I want to know what your take is. Do you think that this is a good initiative for the church to take?
Like at the end of the day, I believe reading is always going to be good for a person. And even if it is even in a, this article that we're referring to, I think they're just kind of sharing the opinion that the church should be a place for deeper reading. And I don't feel like it's, offering much up beyond an opinion. But even then, in the worst case scenario, if they're offering, whether it's a book club or if it's just reading deeply in the word, the more you read, it's not like that's going to I think the risk of it poisoning your mind is lesser than the benefits that your mind will have when reading. Like we always say, the best way to deconvert from your Christian faith is just to read the book. And I feel encouraging people to be in the word more and be more literate in the word. It's the reading of the word that can be powerful. Once it gets all wrapped up in, your leadership's interpretation and, well, this is what it actually means. And when God said this, well, what he actually meant was that. Well, if you're already in marching footstep with whatever your minister, whatever your pastor says, then yeah, your reading isn't going to do too much. But if you already are at the point of saying, okay, I am taking this in, and also it doesn't make sense, and that is powerful. But if you're not reading the stuff, then you're like, well, I'll just go with it, right? So I think, we shouldn't fear churches encouraging their congregants to read. If nothing else, then hopefully those churches that are kind of in the middle of being shitty but not quite shitty, hopefully just reading more can help bring them to the side of okay, I'm not going to be that shitty kind of church.
Sure.
We can actually skew away and have a better understanding of other people, because we actually can think about what other people think about.
Yeah, and there seems to be a dichotomy here, right? On the one hand, the church maybe, if we have history to point to, which we certainly do, could take advantage of people by coaxing them into a dogma, offering them the tools of literacy. On the other hand, you get people who get a necessary skill in this world for free, and they also are the ones that are questioning what they're being taught. And, that is a benefit to the rest of society, I would argue. So this reminds me of a video clip I saw of a crab that was being boiled alive in a pot, but it was still eating, so it went after the food, right? It was still eating. It went after the food, but it was kind of just falling apart and being exploited, right? And so I guess to say what I mean by that is the church thinks they're getting something out of that, but instead, they might be burning up around. I don't know. That was a really bad analogy, but but I think that it could backfire, and that's really what I'm trying to get at. And so Tracy, I think that you probably think, or you probably could understand where the church might be trying to exploit these people. What could come of this in your perspective?
So, Jimmy, what I'm going to have to tell you is that it really, you can't, a book that you're supposed to base your life off of, you should not learn how to read by reading that book, because then you only know how to read that book. It doesn't give you the skills for all the other books you need. They are purporting to give these skills for literacy, but they're not. They're giving skills for biblical literacy. A properly developed literacy should be composed of many different books and many different styles. This seems to me just like a poorly shrouded plot to, oh, you don't understand it? Well, let me give you the way you understand it so that the book that doesn't make sense makes sense. It seems to be just a poorly shrouded plot to exploit those who don't know how to read very well anyway, and show them that, yeah, it doesn't make sense unless you factor in this other thing that I made up that isn't in the book anywhere. I can only see, I mean, yes, I can see the benefit to reading the book and questioning it, but I'm seeing a lot of these other problems that I'm not entirely certain enough people are going to be able to identify when they're happening to them and be able to escape. I don't know if you look back on the books that if you've ever reread a book you read from your childhood that you thought was great, and then you go back and read it with your newly developed literacy skills, and you're like, wow, this is not as good as I thought. Sci-fi books from the 80s describing women as she boobed boobily down the stairs. It's when you mature and you get better and your literacy advances, you can look back and you can find these problems. But if you spend that entire interim basing your life off of this book, I would wager you're far less likely to be able to identify these problems.
Yeah, and that's a different take, I think, than we all had, and it's a very interesting one. And I think it's because the church is not going to promote that kind of diversity in thinking, which is exactly right. You know, if the church is going to offer you a chance at literacy, then why not expand it to just beyond the Bible? Hell, we could even stick with other religious texts if you want, but why not expand it? Why just stick with one book? And I think that points to the exploitation. And I honestly do think, you know, bringing back up the dichotomy that I talked about. On the one hand, yes, take the free service. Okay, this reminds me of a time I have a family member who's a clergy member who was talking about how a person who was deeply affected with PTSD by their time in combat came and sought out my family member, clergy member, to get some help. Excuse me, and while my family member says, well, see, this is God using you, I thought, well, this is a guy taking advantage of you right back at you so that they can get the help that they want. And I say, go ahead and go to learn to read. But I think what's important to point out is that once people in Western society started learning to read the Bible on their own, instead of having somebody read it in Latin where they sat there and didn't know what the hell was going on, that's when religion started to fracture. Right. That's when Catholicism broke into Protestantism, and then Protestantism broke, and it's still breaking today. We've got 45,000 different sects of Christianity, as opposed to the maybe 2 or 3 main sects that started. So I am off on my little tangent, and I want to turn back to Helen. You know, Helen, have you, after hearing all of this, you know, have you rethought your position that maybe this couldn't be somehow beneficial? Like, is the underlying manipulation the primary factor here, or should we just forget about it and move on?
It's kind of, again, mixed feelings, because I want people to be able to read, but the thing is, though, it's like the carrot and stick bullshit, and that's the thing that's so aggravating about it, because like on its surface it seems like a very good idea, yeah. You know, but at the same time, like the previous story we were talking about, it's a failure of certain systems that are supposed to serve the wider populace as a whole. And now churches are coming in and being like, oh, we'll help you, and you can, learn to read, and you can get, additional stuff for healthcare and blah, 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 blah. No. I want churches to stay in their fucking lane. You're a church. People are supposed to come and talk to their invisible sky daddy. That is what they're supposed to do, and worship it, and worship the air. Fine, go do that. And you're supposed to tell people the invisible sky daddy's listening to them. That's your job. Okay. Your job is not to take college age adults and teach them how to do, analytical literacy. That is not your job. And you're doing it with one book, or it's going to be some other like apologetic book. It's going to be something written by William Lane Craig or something like that. That's what it's going to be. It is not going to be, let's look at the Bible. Let's learn about when it was written. Let's look at who it was written by, what books were left out. Why did people have these beliefs at the time? What's changed? Like they're not going, like, we're going to talk about the Gospels and how they were written years after when Jesus was alive, and that the 4 authors might not have even existed. They were just names that are pulled out of people's butts. Like that conversation is not going to happen. It is going to be, this is the irreverent truth, and you got to believe it. And we're going to teach you how to read this one book. And that's the thing that's so frustrating, because I understand. And also, the Bible's a fucking bore. It's not a good book. And he's an editor, really bad.
It's good if you like.
All over the place.
It's good if you like murder. If you like murder and genocide and horrible sex acts and people losing their freedoms, it's good. I'm sorry, continue, please.
Yeah, if you want a horror story, it's a great book. Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, there's better stuff out there, but also at the same time, like, we want people to read. We want them to have, we're always like, more literacy is a good thing, but again, I want parents and teachers, the ones to do this. I don't want the church to do this. But at the same time, I'm like, well, it's better than nothing. And also, there's a little part of me, okay, that if they read the Bible, they'll realize how fucked up it is, and it's all bullshit. And because how do you become an atheist? Read a Bible.
Yeah, and at that point, so Stephen, you had kind of alluded to that as well, because you feel that the congregation, the people in the congregation, are the only ones that are really going to be sucked in, right? The people that are already sucked in, and the ones that are not are just going to take the skill and maybe move on with it. But is there something more that comes from non-religious people who are being offered a chance to read? Maybe not just in understanding the text, but exposing them to the everyday happenings of a church organization. What do you think the benefit there could be?
Relatedly, there's times where I would like to go back to my old Bible college and take a course and just say, wait a minute. Can I ask a question here? Because something doesn't make sense, right? But I'm pretty sure I have to like sign off on whatever like statement of faith or doctrine that says, no, the Bible is true. You don't question it. I'm just like, okay. So I feel like so many of my questions would be subverted because you already need to be plaguing on this field in order to be in this playground. I think if there were to be a benefit, I believe that there's a benefit for people who are within that Christian bubble to be exposed to people who are outside of that bubble. I have a good relationship with one of our local pastors here. One of the series that I do on YouTube is just honest questions from a local pastor. And it's been so great for the two of us just to connect. And I always want to get to know him, but he just doesn't stop asking me questions because he just wants to get to know me. And because of that, we're able to connect. And I can just say, well, yeah, this is what it means to be queer. This is what it means to be in an open relationship. And just to challenge challenge his misconceptions and his preconceived notions. So like there's always that benefit. Like, I'm not going to go to a church to partake in a Bible study about whatever. What's that Peretti guy and his that's how out of touch I am with current Christian literature. Is I have no idea what people are reading in churches now. But there is that benefit of like, what if only there was a magical way where we could break down these barriers and you can see this is who the people on the other side of the fence are. Mm-hmm. And if that was done through a book study or what have you, then there's benefits for that for sure.
Yeah. And that would be a beautiful thing. I want to just really touch on some of the things, though, that this article said that I just can't get on board with. First of all, Christians ought to recall the literate society, which was largely brought on by the modern church. That is incorrect. Church and literacy throughout Western history have not gone together. In fact, the church was able to flourish because people could not keep up. They couldn't keep track, and literacy was not really a thing. Another thing, slaves were reading people. Slaves were reading people. Slaves were not reading people in most cases. Okay. Caveats, sure. Exceptions to the rule, sure. But there were even slave Bibles that were produced for slaves so that the ones that could read got the incorrect message. Literacy, again, does not go along with religion. And then finally, reading literary art is an expression of our being made in the image of a creator God. I have no idea how those things fit together. God didn't write anything down, okay? And the things that are written down about him have been written and rewritten and reinterpreted and translated and reinterpreted and retranslated again. And different authors from the same time period have competing views on the different. It doesn't make any sense. And so that's important to point out. Now, having said all that, we at the nonprofits have a major problem with the Bible claiming a lot of the legitimacy or religion claiming to have the kind of credibility and legitimacy, as you can see here in the article that we just covered. And if you want to see more of that, click one of the links below and keep tuning in to the nonprofits.